Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, May 6th, and tons of stuff happened over the weekend, but I want to start with the House versus the NCAA case, the NIL back pay case that we've been talking about for quite some time. Sounds like it's starting to come to a head. Sounds like there's starting to be some agreements come to, or at least some common ground starting to come to, and we'll get to why that is a good thing in the short term, but creates a lot more questions down the road. But then we'll get into a little bit of talk around bowl games. It seems like there is being an idea kicked around for more bowl games in the future, which is something that I think we'll get some mixed reviews. I'll get into my thoughts about it. I'm kind of mixed on it as well, to be totally honest with you, but we'll see how that kind of plays out. And then we'll get into a transfer portal update. One of the last ones that we'll do around here. It's starting to wind down, tons of commitments starting to roll in, and less big-time names on the table for teams to go after, but still some big-time guys out there. So I want to break down everything for you guys there. And then we have a Good Vibes Monday, and we're going to go back to the College Football 25. Well, it seems like we are getting closer and closer to this game coming out, and closer to that big-time reveal that should be here in about 10 to 11 days. It's kind of fuzzy on when exactly it's coming out, but it seems like it's coming out very, very soon. So we'll get into that towards the end of the show. But before we jump into everything, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here. Maybe you can ask me something that you've been wondering about. You can call me out on something that I didn't mention during a segment. Anything is welcome. But you can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. Huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of watch the show, but not only that, be a part of the show in some ways. So would love to have that. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about this House versus the NCAA case. There has been so much stuff going on around this case, and it feels like it's starting to kind of come to a head with the settlement agreement that hopefully will be agreed to very, very soon. The NCAA is pushing very, very hard for that, and we'll get to why that exactly is here in a second. But Brandon Marcello over at CBS Sports did a fantastic piece about this, not only giving us an idea of where we sit today, but how this creates, really thousands of questions, to be totally honest with you, about what the future of college football looks like, what the structure will look like, how NIL will be broken down. So let's kind of jump into the questions that he broke down and kind of get you an idea of just where all this sits right now and where it might sit, 5 years down the road. So to start, as we know, this NIL back pay case has been a huge topic of conversation. It looks like the current discussions are sitting somewhere around $1 billion to go back to former athletes, whether it was from being in video games in the past or just missing out on the NIL money that current kids are, encouraged and pushed to take. So I think it could be really interesting to see how this kind of unfolds, because the reality is the NCAA is in a spot where they very much need this to be settled. It's one of those things where when you have a case like this where antitrust laws and things of that nature are brought into play, it sits at like 1.1 billion or something like that. I can't exactly remember the exact number at this very moment, but it sounds like if it were to go to court, those numbers could be tripled or even more to about 4.2 billion. So essentially, this has to get settled because the NCAA just needs it to get settled more than anything else. If they don't get it settled this way, it's going to be essentially the end of the NCAA, even if it's not already, to be totally honest with you. But one of the bigger questions coming out of this was not, what the settlement money was going to be for the NCAA, but how it was going to affect the rest of the colleges in the college football or the college sports world. So this obviously would bring in something along the lines of revenue sharing. And there was a new report from Pete Thamel, I believe, this morning that I want to get to a little bit later that throws a little bit of a wrench into the kind of this type of stuff. But it seems like if you were to go to the revenue sharing route, the amount per year would be between 15 and 25 million, according to some of the athletic directors that were surveyed by 247 Sports over there at CBS. So there's been a ton of things going on around this type of thing, and obviously there's a ton of dominoes that are still yet to fall. I mean, we don't really know what happens after this. How that 25 to 15 or 15 to 25 is allocated. We don't know. Does it go to the athletic department? Is the collective involved at all? So a lot of questions to be answered, but let's get to the one that I think a lot of people are focusing on, which is the salary cap. It feels like something that a lot of people have been pushing for quite some time, but the issue with that is you want there to be a salary cap, right? You want there to be a moniker that the big time teams can't go over, because it just helps the competitive balance of a game that does not do the best of keeping competitive balance as a part of the game. So I think that's something that a lot of people have been pointing towards as a non-negotiable in these discussions. But I think the big question is, will the NIL collectives be included in this conversation at all? Like, will they be brought in-house to the athletic departments? Will they be separate from the athletic departments? The going theory, it seems, around athletic departments and things of that nature is, if the whole 15 to 25 million, if that is entirely put on the athletic departments and they are forced to pay that entire amount without the collective's help, or without alumni help and that type of thing, collectives will still be in place. Because the reality is, you can have a salary cap and that's all well and good, but it could not apply to the NIL part of the world, right? These are looking more like kind of a contract type model, although it might not be. But in the world of where it is a contract type model going forward with employment for players, you still want that outside entity to kind of help you get that competitive advantage. So it'll be really interesting to see if the collectives are kind of grouped in on this. They have to pay a certain amount of the 15 to 25, because then you'd probably bring them in-house, bring them a part of the athletic department, and make it a little bit more of a cohesive type structure, instead of what we have now, which is a little bit all over the place with some different entities that you don't fully understand having quite a bit of power in the sport. So it's a very, very interesting thing. It's something that I think we're going to be watching very, very closely, because if collectives are able to stay around, it doesn't necessarily change the the gap between these teams. Excuse me, I was trying to find my words. The gap between these teams, the competitive balance that you really want to set up in college football, it probably wouldn't do much to subside that if you were to add a salary cap but not include the collectives. So I would expect them to include the collectives in this. I would expect the collectives to be brought in-house into the athletic department and just have it be a little bit more of a crystalline structure around the NIL world. But then the biggest question, I think that, if you're a college football fan, you're probably not too worried about this, but what happens to every other sport? I'm someone who, college football is the top. There's no question about that. I love college football more than I love most things, to be totally honest with you. But I'm a big fan of all college sports. I love college basketball. I love, watching college baseball, get into a ton of different stuff throughout the year, because you identify with their teams, right? You identify with the school that you went to. You identify with the school you grew up being a fan of, so you want to be able to support them year round, and it's something that is hugely important to a number of people. And then you have fans who, played at those schools, whether it was a smaller sport like swimming or equestrian or whatever, that want to be a part of their school going forward and that team going forward. It seems like it's not going to be pretty. And just to give you an idea, I have a quote here from Jason Besler, who is the president of Student NIL, or Student Athlete NIL, excuse me. And I think it gives you an idea of just kind of where we're sitting right now. So he said, it's very likely we're going to see non-revenue sports get massacred. Title IX is something, or is going to be a very big battle. How are you going to stop it? It's going to be very tough. So just to give you an idea of where we're at, it's kind of, college sports has been at a place where everything is so confusing, everything's all over the place for so long, that you've kind of had to work backwards. You've had to make up ground for where you kind of lost it in the first little bit of NIL and all of this type of stuff, with the NCAA kind of dragging its feet a little bit. Ground needs to be made up, and the way you do that, honestly, is kind of cutting corners. So college football is safe. There's no question about that. They are self-sustainable. College basketball is likely safe, just because they are one of the other revenue sharing or revenue making sports in a lot of these different athletic departments. Baseball is kind of on the edge there, but every single other sport is going to be worried year over year about this new kind of setup they have and the new way of things, because more money that goes out the door in revenue sharing and in contracts and everything that is to come for athletic departments, the less there is for these non-revenue sharing sports. And then you have to sit down and have a question and say, is it worth keeping, let's just say swimming, or swimming and diving. Is it worth keeping that sport when it's not bringing in money, where we could allocate that money to football and basketball and the sports that are bringing in money? And that's a conversation I'm sure that has been happening across athletic departments for a very long time. But the reality is haven't necessarily gotten to the point where you need to pull that trigger. You need to make that hard decision, but that time could come very soon, especially with all of the changes going on, and especially if you get into a revenue sharing employment type model, things get a little bit more sketchy for those smaller non-revenue creating sports. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch. But the biggest thing that we kind of talked about last week a little bit is the Players Association of this all. What does this look like, and kind of how can we get players a seat at the table? Because that's the most important thing, I think, in this conversation. Is if you're going to have a conversation about how, you're going to handle kids being paid and being compensated at the college football and college sports level, them not being in on those conversations is outright ridiculous. So we talked about in last week athletes.org, which was a new kind of players association that was set up. And the UAB team has signed with them. The football team, the first Division I football team, do fully sign with them. They have 3,000 active members. I was not sure when I was talking about this just how big of an organization it was. They have 1,500 guys from power conferences, he says. There are so many things going into this, and there's so many different ways to kind of look at this, but it looks like that athletes.org, or AO as you'll see it kind of referred to in a lot of these articles, will hit critical mass, and as they say, with 50% of all athletes in power conferences within the next year. So they fully expect this to be a continually growing thing, and not necessarily something that is a blip on the radar by any means. So this is huge. It's something that is absolutely something that needs to happen. I don't think there's any question about that, just because when you're in a situation where you're being employed by someone, especially if you're someone that is, 18 to 22 years old, and a lot of this goes a little bit over your head, you want to be at the table. Now, here's the very, very interesting report that I heard from Pete Thamel this morning, that it sounds like this group of people, the College Football Players Association more specifically, is less interested in employment than we once thought, or we once assumed, I think. I think a lot of us thought that that was just kind of going to be the way of things. We were going to get into that realm, and players are going to be more than fine with that. It sounds like they'd rather have a collective bargaining agreement, but not full-time employment. So they're trying to figure out kind of a hybrid there. We'll figure out what happens there. But there's another interesting quote that came out from Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, when he was talking about employment and talking about the future of college football. He said, if you convert all college football into employment, there's simply no doubt based on the math that you'll lose an enormous number of student-athlete opportunities across all three divisions, because the money is not there. Most schools lose money on sports, even in D1. So it's something that we talked about with baseball and basketball. Those are the ones that bring in money. The rest of them essentially lose money every single year, outside of some very, very special circumstances. So it gives you an idea that not everyone can do this. That's just the reality of the situation. $15 to $25 million is not an easy thing to do for the vast majority of schools. I mean, more than 50% of Group of 5 schools earn less than $40 million annually in revenue. So if $25 million of that is going straight out the door, you got a bigger problem on your hands, and you got some really tough decisions to make. So, and just to put that in comparison to some other schools, Ohio State brought in about $251.6 million in revenue last year. So there's a gap, and they need to be handled separately. And it's something that Jeffrey Kessler, the lead attorney on this case, has kind of talked about a lot. He says you have to look at the Power Five differently than the Group of Five and other schools just because they're different. They sit on different thrones when it comes to the financial burden on some of these programs compared to the others. So Ohio State can throw that money out the window and have no problem with it. Troy probably can't. So you're going to have some tough conversations, and this is going to be a monumental domino to fall. It's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to watch. Marcelo did go into kind of what congressional help could do with this, could definitely streamline everything. But as I've said in the past, I would be pretty skeptical if they were to get in, that they will get in the next little bit. Especially in a election year and things of that nature. I think it's more likely that we have to wait a little bit if Congress wants to get involved, but it feels like things are starting to happen, right? This is a huge domino. I've said it before, and I'll say it, probably a number of other times. This might be the most consequential thing going on in college sports right now. It might be the most important thing for the future of college sports in quite some time. So this is going to be huge. It feels like that domino is starting to tilt a little bit, and we might have it fall pretty soon. The aftermath is going to be a little bit messy, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the next segment because a little bit more mess might be added to this. But overall, if you're a college football fan and only a college football fan, you don't really need to worry about this. Your teams will be fine. Now, if you're a Group of Five or a smaller school fan, you might want to be a little bit worried. I'll be totally honest with you. But I think if you're, a fan of the big boys, if you're a fan of only the Power 5 schools and only football, no worries. If you're the vast majority of college football and sports fans, I would assume, you like every sport. And it's very, very frustrating to watch some of them fall by the wayside. But I guess it's the cost of doing business at this point. So it'll be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. You very much hope that these smaller sports do not fall by the wayside, but it feels like we're heading that direction. Just how quickly will we get there is the big question. But we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the confusion around college football. It sounds like there's an idea out there for more bowl games to be added, so let's get into that and then just kind of what the postseason could look like going forward, because there's a lot of questions, no doubt about that. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of an update around the NCAA against the House case, a little bit of an NIL back pay case that is going to have a lot of long impacting and long stretching implications from this. So broke down a little bit of what you can kind of expect from there and what some of the consequences are going to be, because it could get a little bit messy. But let's get into something else that could make the college football world just a little bit more messy. It sounds like there has been an idea thrown out there to have even more bowl games going forward. This has been something that has been thrown out there for quite some time, and something that has been kind of going around NCAA over the last little bit. They talked about increasing March Madness from 68 teams to 80 teams recently, something that I tend to expect to happen, which I wish it wouldn't, but that's a totally different thing. I'll let Nelson over on the basketball podcast handle that. But overall, I think it's one of those things where, given this new NIL back pay case and given the revenue sharing and all of the new bills that are about to come forth in these athletic departments across the country, you're looking for new ways to make money, right? You're looking for new ways for your school to get on national television, to have more TV deals, to do the things that will at least keep you afloat, right? So obviously, postseason is an area to do that. Bowl games is a great place to do that. So we talked about kind of the NIL structure and how you're kind of trying to curb opt-outs in these bowl games, which has been a huge issue for quite some time. They want you to play 12 games in the regular season and a bowl game no matter what. That's something that a contract model or an employment model will get you much easier. As we just found out, that has been a little bit more sketchy with the new sentiment that was sent out there by the College Football Players Association, but it's still very much in the cards. I think that's definitely a very real possibility. Nick Carparelli, I think I pronounced his name wrong last time, so I apologize about that. But Nick Carparelli, the bowl season director, is someone that has kind of been pushing this for quite some time and has conversations with athletic department heads, and has said they are very much in favor of this, which makes sense. You know, if you're going to smaller schools and they want a piece of that pie when it comes to postseason revenue, so that totally makes sense. He says that there's not enough full opportunities for a real postseason in the new model that we're throwing out there. So it's something that I'm kind of on the fence about. As we've seen over the last couple of years, there haven't been enough bowl eligible teams to fit in the last 3 years, I believe. There've been a couple of 5-win teams that have made bowl games, is the way I was supposed to say that. You had Rutgers in 2021, Rice in 2022, and then Minnesota this past year, all made bowl games as 5 and 7 teams. So you'd have to expand the parameters. That's something that's obvious. I don't really know how that would work because, as we all know, once you get down to 5 and 7 between 3 and 9, that's kind of just a conference and schedule type thing more than anything else. So it'll be interesting to see how that is all kind of played out. But we talked about the opt-outs. It's a huge topic of conversation. It sounds like at least 78 players opt out of the bowl games. A year ago, 431 entered the transfer portal before their bowl games. So it gives you an idea of just where we're at in how these players view these bowl games. And I can get into this into a more lengthy segment. Oh my gosh. A lengthy segment later on. But overall, I think that's something that just needs to be fixed with the calendar. That's just something that needs to be handled that way because there's so many different confusing things that go on in December, and clearing up some of that would be a huge part of this conversation. But overall, I mean, we talked about it last week, Florida State being kind of the poster child for this, 33 players not playing in the Orange Bowl where they just got demolished by Georgia in every sense of the word. So it kind of brought this to the attention of everyone. And, you know, the fans have been yelling this for quite some time. We want to see the best players out there, and they're trying to do their best to create that atmosphere. So it's just an idea right now. It's something that's being kicked around. Probably will take a little bit of time to implement and set up everything, get new sponsors, and there's tons of, you know, red tape to get through before you can set up these new bowl games. But from my point of view, and maybe I'm alone in this, I don't know, but from my point of view, I do think there is a certain level of trying to expand something before you've made it good. And that sounds, you know, maybe a little bit intense and a little bit aggressive towards the bowl season, but I think we've all seen over the last couple of years that the bowl season just doesn't feel like it did in the past. I remember when I was growing up, every single game felt huge. You were setting up, you know, on a Tuesday to watch football. It was awesome. It was never anything where you were thinking, well, my team's not in the playoffs, so why do I care? My team's not in a New Year's Six game, why do I care type of thing. That was never really a conversation. And it's something that has been created by, you know, somewhat, you know, people in media saying that, yeah, these games don't matter. Just outright saying that up front and then getting mad at players for listening to them, but that's a totally different conversation. I think when you look at kind of the future of college football, when you look at all of the things that need to be fixed, adding more bowl games is way down on the list. Like 50 to 100 on the list of things that need to be fixed before we get there. So I would love to just see a less messy system in the postseason before we start adding to it, where you have a more crystalline schedule where it's not overlapping with a ton of different things happening in December, and you have very, very strict transfer portal windows, and all of this different stuff is just kind of worked out to a better degree. You have the employment or whatever that looks like, the payment structure in place for college athletes going forward. You just need to make some common sense steps forward before you can do this, really, to be totally honest, because I know you want to create more money for these teams. I know you want to create more of a influx for the new bills that are coming down the road, but the reality is I do think there is this idea that creating more opportunities for these teams will create more money is an idea for sure, and it definitely is something that could come to fruition, but doing it in a messy system doesn't help these teams at all. It puts them probably in more danger, partly because there's going to be just so much more confusion, there's going to be so much more things to pay for in the grand scheme of things, and it doesn't necessarily help them from a financial perspective if you just add another thing to their plate. I think you need to add it once they're fully ready to take it, right? You want to make sure that everyone is in a good place financially before you throw out more of these ideas, but there's a ton of stuff going on with the postseason. I mean, the Group of Five playoff is something that we've talked about a number of times, and it sounds like that is something that is kind of on the outside looking in as of right now. It feels like that idea has not been fully fleshed out. The Mountain West Commissioner, Gloria Nevarez, said it's just not a proposal that has been, she hasn't seen a proposal, let's say, that has been enticing to her by any means to leave the current contract they have with the college football playoff to do something else. But I said it, last week, I'll say it again. I do think we're at a place in college football where it kind of needs to be segmented. I wish that wasn't the case, to be totally honest with you. I'd love to have one cohesive college football where you can play everyone and you have everyone kind of intermingling with each other. But the second that this became professional sports, the second that you added NIL into the conversation, was you started a clock, essentially, on all the small teams and all the big teams, really, to kind of take over the sport. It was always going to happen whenever, finances became even a bigger part of the sport. These guys were going to flex their muscles even more. And I think the Group of Five, their best option, in my opinion, is to break off, have their own playoff, have maybe a situation where the regular season overlaps with Power 5 just a little bit, but you still have your own playoff, and then you can get back together for the postseason for those lower level bowl games. So I think there's options here, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know if the Group of Five playoff is, or the Group of Five, new league or whatever you want to call it, is kind of an idea that is fully fleshed out at this point. I think Derek Dooley and his group have a little bit of work there to be done in terms of just ironing out details, making sure that everyone's on the same page, and then most importantly, really just kind of making sure the finances work out for everyone involved, because you don't want to leave a situation for the idea that the finances could be better somewhere else. You want to make sure that they absolutely are, and you're getting more money than you would get from the college football playoff, which is a pretty tall order for the most part. So this is probably a little bit down the road. I think this is probably the best way to go about the postseason, where you have two different playoffs, but you have one cohesive bowl season where all of the teams that are on the top tier of the Group of Five and are on the top tier of the Power 5 or Power 4, whatever you want to call it, are in the playoffs for their respective groups. Then you have bowl games where some are Power 5 against Power 5, some are Group of 5 against Group of 5, but also you get those overlap games, so you don't lose the games that are really fun, and you get to see some crazy things happen. App State against Texas A&M a year ago is a great example where you want to see those games. You want to see some crazy upsets every now and then, so you want to have those games intact, but also you want to give the Group of 5 a shot. And I think under the current way of things in the 12-team college football playoff. I think it gives them a hypothetical shot. I don't think it gives them an actual shot to make real noise in the playoff, and I think it gives them almost a worse shot than they had in the 4-team to win a title. So it's a very interesting thing. I think the group of 5 will have a lot of weirdly will have a lot amount of power around what happens with the future of the bowl season, future of the postseason in general. I think personally more bowl games is not necessarily a bad idea. I just think you have to get to a place where everything is kind of set. You know what the future of college football looks like. You know what the employment or payment structure looks like. You know how it's affecting the colleges and the teams, and then you work from there. I think that gives you the best way to set up this in the most efficient, most logical way possible, instead of just throwing bowl games out there hoping that it creates the financial, or it creates the ability for the financial burden to be off these teams the way that you obviously hope that it can be. So it'll be really interesting to watch all of this kind of unfold. I think there is a huge push from the group of 5 to just have a bigger seat at the table, and I think the playoff is probably the best way for them to do that. So it'll be fascinating to see this unfold. I think it's something that I'm always on board for more football. There's no two ways about that. I just don't want there to be a situation where we are pushing more into a already very confusing situation. So I just hope that they, take a step back, hope they kind of take a second just to think about all this and set up get their ducks in a row, as it were, and really attack this the right way, because I think it can be a great idea. I just think as of right now, there are a million things that need to be figured out before we can start thinking about more bowl games. But we'll definitely keep your eye on that and kind of give you an idea of how that group of 5 proposal is coming along, because that's a very interesting thing going around right now. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the transfer portal. Tons is going on. It's starting to wind down. This might actually be our last full transfer portal update, but who knows? There's still tons of names out there that are big-time names, but some big-time guys came off the board. So I want to break down where we sit right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the new idea for possibly more bowl games coming down the road in the college football postseason. Not the biggest fan of that, to be totally honest, at least in the short term, but I think it could work in the long term, but we'll get to that as it kind of unfolds. But let's jump into the transfer portal window. There has been a ton of stuff happening over the last couple of weeks in this spring portal, but it is officially closed. We finally have no more names going into there, but we still have some big names in there, and we had some big time commitments over the weekend. So I want to break down first the commitments, and then we'll get to kind of the intel on all the guys that are left on the board. But let's start with Timmy McClain, one of the quarterbacks from UCF that found his way out after KJ Jefferson was brought in from Arkansas. Definitely a good decision for him. He has landed at Arkansas State, so definitely a little bit of a step down for him, but a very electric kid. Made one of the coolest plays a year ago for UCF against Baylor on a 4th and 5. If you want to look that up, I'm sure it will not be hard to find at this point on Twitter and all of those different social pages. So this kid can make some plays. He's very, very fun to watch. Very excited to see what he can do at that level. And I think he could do some really insane things, to be totally honest with you. we had Gavin Freeman commit to Oklahoma State. This one is very surprising to me. This was not one that I expected. Apparently, there was some talk about an Oklahoma guy going to Oklahoma State. I did not know it was going to be this one. He is an Oklahoma kid, so it makes a little bit of sense, but he definitely will be a big-time player for the Pokes, whether it's a receiver or definitely as a returner will be a huge player for them, but playing against Oklahoma is going to be a very, very interesting thing for this kid. So definitely a very interesting commitment. Will be a really fun thing to watch when they finally meet up. Keon Graves, a wide receiver from Ohio State, is making his way to Cal, and I think this is a fantastic pickup for Cal. A very, very talented kid that was just stuck in probably one of the best, if not the best, wide or position room in the entire country. So makes sense that he made his way over there. Will be a huge help to whoever wins that battle for quarterback one between Fernando Mendoza and Chandler Rogers, who's the transfer from North Texas. Both very talented guys, but when you grab a 4-star coming out of high school and Keon Graves to kind of help you out, I think it can only be a good thing. So a huge pickup for Cal. I think it helps them a ton just to kind of make them a little bit more dangerous, where, to be honest, when you look at them, they're already pretty dangerous in that ACC as it is. Sean Dolock is a guy that we talked about last week. He was coming from Utah State. Well, he's going back to the place he came from. He was at Buffalo a year ago, got injured at some point during the year, and kind of just wasn't able to get back on the field. Definitely was sorely missed by that defense. Made his way to Utah State and made his way right back to Buffalo. So a huge pickup for Pete Limbo, who just took over there for Maurice Lindquist after he went to Bama to be the defensive back coach. So if this kid is healthy, he can absolutely play on pretty much any team in the country, to be totally honest with you. He's an absolute tackle machine, a great middle linebacker, and plays the game with a ton of passion. So really, really like that kid. Very glad he found his way back to kind of home base for him. He's from Buffalo, so definitely will be a very, very fun thing for them. And picked up a great player if you're Buffalo, that's for sure. Isaiah Hamilton has committed to Ole Miss, something we expected for quite some time. Right when we talked on Friday, that was really just a matter of time until he committed. It is now official. The portal class for Ole Miss is just insane. It's going to be super important to their success. There's so many guys across this portal class that essentially need to hit if they want to do what they're capable of doing this year. So it'll be really interesting to watch. I think this is a guy that could absolutely start for them right away across from Trey Amos. So it'll be fun to watch. I think this portal class will have a ton to do with what you see from Ole Miss this year. And then another team that has a ton to do with what's going to happen this year is Oregon, and they brought in Derek Harmon, which is a massive pickup. Someone that we were looking at USC and Colorado for the most part, and then he just commits to Oregon pretty much out of nowhere. So Dan Lanning is doing absolute work. They brought in Jamari Caldwell already at the defensive tackle position, so bringing in Derek Harmon as well is just insane, to be totally honest with you. Also, his teammate from Michigan State that also left with him, Simeon Barrow Jr., has committed to Miami, a huge pickup for Miami. They desperately needed some help across the interior of that defensive line to help out Ruben Bain and being the game breaker that he absolutely can be. I think week one against Florida is not only huge for the upcoming year, obviously, but for this program overall. I think they have to be ready to go and be in a position where you're going to very much need, really, to win that game if you want to get that ball rolling and get everyone very confident in this team. But let's go to the back end here and talk about D'Angelo Pons, a very, very talented player out of JMU. He's heading to Indiana, and that has been a thing that has happened over and over and over again this offseason. Kurt Cignetti, the head coach of JMU a year ago, found his way to Indiana, so a lot of guys follow him. I believe it's around 10 guys at this point that have made their way from JMU to Indiana, so it'll be really interesting to see how this team kind of evolves. I think a lot of those guys will play big roles in this team this upcoming year, so it'll be interesting to see how this kind of pseudo JMU team, I guess, works in the Big Ten. But another corner that came off the board, Javion Cole, has committed to Texas, a huge pickup for Texas, where you lost Terrence Brooks, you lost Austin Jordan. Now it hurts a little bit less, that's for sure. You had 7 picks for him over the last 2 years at San Jose State, so elite ball skills, can do a ton of really, really good things. could start right away, will be battling Gavin Holmes for that other starting spot, likely across from Manny Muhammad. So a very talented kid, someone that I tend to expect to be the starter, whether it's week 1 or week 3, I don't know, but I think he will be the starter for probably the majority of next year for Texas, just because you need elite ball skills out there. I guess he will play field corner, although I'm very, very skeptical of that. We'll see what happens there. There's tons of dominoes to fall there, but a huge pickup for Texas. And then finally, Peyton Woodyard, one of the biggest names off the board. Oregon had a great weekend. There's no doubt about that. They brought in Derek Harmon. They brought in Peyton Woodyard. This one was expected pretty much right when he hit the portal from Bama, so I think no one really has benefited from the portal overall more than Oregon. Bringing in all the guys they brought in was just insane, but we'll break down some winners and losers from the portal tomorrow, so definitely stay tuned for that. But just to give you an idea of where we sit now and kind of all the players that are still on the board, we have an update for you here. So General Booty, one of the best names in college football by a comfortable margin, is leaving Oklahoma. He had gotten mostly Group of 5 offers, but it sounds like Iowa has been in contact. Pete Nakos dropped that during this weekend, and I think that'll be a very interesting thing to watch. This is a kid that absolutely lit the world on fire at JUCO, and when you're Iowa, you need a little bit of help in that quarterback room from a depth perspective, especially with Declan Hill. I can't remember his name. Deacon Hill, there you go. Deacon Hill walking out the door. I think adding someone like General Booty could be a great addition to that team. Elijah Badger is still kind of going through a lot of his visits and things of that nature. He has heard from a ton of teams, but it seems like he's been to Washington. He's expected to go to Florida and Arizona sometime soon. Might have been at one of those places this past weekend, to be totally honest with you. So this is a huge pickup, maybe one of the biggest players left in the board. Tyler Barron, another one, the edge rusher from Tennessee, who we'll get to here in a minute, but very, very interesting to watch. Then you have Jalen Berger, who's a very talented running back from Michigan State. I believe he started his career at Indiana. I could be wrong about that. I don't remember. He's a two-time transfer, that's for sure. Wisconsin, that's what it was. He's been in contact with a ton of teams. You have Georgia Tech, Minnesota, Duke, UCLA, Arizona, Boston College. Plenty of teams that need some running back help that he can absolutely help them out. It'll be really interesting to see where this kid ends up. Not exactly sure who has the lean right now. I know Arizona would be a great place for him with a lot of their running backs finding their way to Washington over the past little bit. So definitely will be interesting to watch that one unfold. Cormani McClain has been very, very quiet on the recruiting front. I have really no idea what is going on there. I thought this was a very talented kid. Obviously, some teams have some worries about some of the things that popped up during his Colorado career, not being quite as committed as Dion would have liked, and I'm sure a lot of other coaches around the country would have liked to see from him. I think the one consistent team that I've seen has been South Florida, although I haven't seen them for quite a bit. So I really don't know what's going to happen with him. I hope that he finds a good place to play and, reaches the heights that he's definitely capable of. But right now, it does not necessarily look great for Cormani McClain out there on the recruiting trail. Another DB out there is King Mack. He was one of the 3 Penn State players that found their way into the portal the very last minute, but this was the biggest hit for sure for Penn State. You lose a guy that was a top 90 recruit from a year ago, very, very talented kid. He took a visit to Bama this weekend, and they will definitely want to lock him in. He would be a huge player for them. Maybe not this year, but definitely down the road for Alabama. Would have helped Penn State down the road for sure. So not a great loss for Penn State. Would be a great pickup for Alabama, but we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Another one that Alabama is kind of picking up traction on is Deshaun Jones. Pete Nakos and Steve Wiltfong have both put in predictions for him to commit to Bama. This is something that I honestly forgot to add him to the cornerback list over here, but he would be off very quickly, so maybe it's better that I didn't add him, to be totally honest with you. Then we have some frontline guys. You have Chief Borders, a very, very talented kid from Nebraska. He is taking a visit to UCLA. He definitely broke out during this spring at Nebraska. They were expecting him to be a big-time player for them. before he left, so UCLA would absolutely love to have him. And then you have Tyler Barron, a very, very talented guy. It sounds like he's down to Miami and Ole Miss again. He has had a wild portal window. He was at Tennessee, committed to Ole Miss, decommitted to Ole Miss, went to Louisville, and then has found his way back into the portal. And I would lean towards Miami, to be totally honest, in this one. I'm not exactly sure, but if they were able to add him to Ruben Bain, that edge rushing would just be out of this world. So it'll be really interesting to watch. The portal is starting to kind of wind down, obviously. We have tons of commitments rolling in, not so many guys with tons of new information, to be totally honest with you. Elijah Herring, it feels like Virginia Tech is still kind of the leader there. It'll be really interesting to watch all of this unfold, but maybe one more of these segments to come, but most likely a wrap-up if anything else. Probably will just kind of sprinkle some new information into some other segments down the road, but a very, very interesting portal cycle. Something that I don't think a lot of us expected for the most part. I think we expected it to be a little bit crazier. I definitely did. I can say that. So apologies if I made anyone very nervous about their teams going into this one that didn't end up coming to fruition. But it was a crazy cycle, especially when you come to spring cycles. It was definitely the most active, definitely the most all over the place, but it has finally come to an end. We can finally breathe a little bit, and hopefully your team wasn't hurt too bad. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we have a Good Vibes Monday for you, and we're going to break down the College Football 25 kind of update on everything that's going on. Chris Fowler gave us some great updates. I have my official predictions for the cover athletes, everything that you could possibly need in this next segment. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal update, as you can see there. Definitely some big time commitments coming in. Everything is obviously winding down as the portal has closed, so tons of stuff that will still be coming in, tons of commitments that are still to drop, but feels like we're coming to a little bit of a resting point, and we're coming to that part of the season where the offseason really kicks in, but the content will not stop around here, I can promise you that. But let's get into a Good Vibes Monday. Let's talk about the College Football 25 game. This has been the well I have gone back to time and again when I have to have a good Vibes Monday, because this is the greatest thing for a lot of college football fans. Let's be honest. I grew up during the heyday of this game. 2014 was one of my favorite games ever, to be totally honest with you. I remember playing that hours on end every single day, but every single game, I think I had from 2008 to 2014, every single game, and played them day in and day out. And it's getting closer and closer to that game being a reality again. It looks like we're about 2.5, 1.5. It's very fuzzy on when that full reveal will come out from EA, where we'll get a gameplay, we'll get the cover athletes, we'll get so much stuff that we've been waiting so long for. We'll get tons of details, but that doesn't mean details have not come out already. It seems Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit's jobs are officially done for this game. They have made every call. They have set every name, every combination you can possibly think of. A couple interesting things did slip out when they were doing kind of different things. You know, Chris Fowler has done those videos from his office that have been just chock full of information that is very interesting. And then Kirk Herbstreit was on the Pat McAfee show and said something that I'm not sure if he was supposed to say, but I'm very glad he did, because it gave us something very interesting to talk about. It sounds like there will be different crews calling different types of games. So depending on the magnitude of the game, if it's a big-time game, you'll have Chris Fowler, you'll have Kirk Herbstreit. But maybe if it's a little bit of a lower game, you'll have someone else. Maybe a Sean McDonough will be thrown in there. I wish they would add Gus Johnson and Joel Klatten to this game. I don't know that they have. I tend to believe they haven't, but I don't know. I'd be very, very excited to hear Gus Johnson's name on this game. So very, very excited for this. I think it's something that will add to the energy of the game. It gets a little monotonous hearing the same voices over and over again. So knowing if, you're playing a Big 12 game that is a little bit under the radar, you'll get a different group. Knowing that, you'll have some different voices, you'll have ers and ahs within there, I think is a huge thing for this. So he also said the game is coming out in July. This has been expected for quite some time and something that has been reported on quite a bit, but very excited to hear someone, with inside knowledge actually say that out loud. He did say, I think, so I don't want to necessarily hype you up too much, but definitely a very, very good sign there. We talked about those Chris Fowler videos that he's been releasing that have been awesome for these type of segments and kind of just getting an idea of what this game will look like. And he released one as he kind of finished up his job over the last couple of years, really. But finally, he is done, and he released a video with a ton of really interesting tidbits in there that I want to get to. Let's start with... let's start with just how much time was put into this game. It sounds like he did about 115 hours of recording over the last 2 years. So an insane amount of time and an insane amount of energy that is put into this. The editors, I'm sure, have started to sift through that 115 hours long ago, but that is a Herculean task. And then when you have you add Kirk Herbstreit into the conversation, it just gets more confusing and possibly even more people. So it's just incredible the amount of time, the amount of man hours that have been put into this. And it's something that Chris Fowler said over and over in this video was he was just wildly impressed with what EA had to bring, how, important this game is to them because they know how important it is to us. So it seems like everything is kind of setting up the right way. He also dropped some other interesting tidbits. He said in the final recording they did some booth analysis between him and Kirk Herbstreit. He said they covered if you have a quarterback that's thrown 5 picks and you keep throwing the ball. He said they'll comment on that, and so essentially they'll politely call you a dummy if you do that. He also said there was going to be, if there is a scenario where you win or lose a game in triple overtime or later where you're trading 2-point conversions, if you pick it off and take it to the other side of the end zone for a pick 2, as they call it, they have a recording ready to go, and they have a wild reaction, and they have everything. So it just gives you an idea of just how detailed, just how into the weeds they got on this last, 2 years building up to this game. It feels like this game has been given the respect and the energy and the attention that I think it deserves. So he also read 700 player names. It sounded like the total number of players that opted in were about 1,200, maybe closer to 1,100, but so a certain amount were left off, probably walk-ons and deeper in the depth chart type guys, but 700 player names is quite a lot. So all of the players that you love the most, unless you're a big-time just Arch Manning guy, they will be in the game. You will hear them. That will be awesome to hear. And then another couple things that came out over the last week and weekend was Matt Brown, who writes the Extra Point newsletter, who's been just all over this. He was on J.D. Piquel's show over on 3, The Hard Count, had some very interesting details to share. One of the biggest things I took away from it, and I think what a lot of people took away from it, was the recruiting on Dynasty Mode looks like it's going to be a little bit different. It sounds like it's going to be more detailed. You'll be able to kind of get attached to players a little bit more, see things like 40-yard dash times and size and weight and more measurables to give you an idea of just who these kids are. It makes you more excited to have that kid on your team. Make sure you get him in-house. Make sure you can incorporate them into the offense. Even if it isn't, a real player, you still have the measurables, all the things that make you so excited about a player when your team recruits them. You now have that in the game. So I think that's going to be a huge, huge thing for creating long dynasties, which is what EA, it's what EA has wanted for quite some time. Apparently, during the past iterations of this game, these dynasties have only been 3 to 5 years, somewhere in that kind of realm. And obviously, that's not what you want. I remember I definitely did probably about 4 years and then tapped out of a dynasty and started a new one because it wasn't super interesting, to be totally honest, recruiting these kids and keeping up a program where it's just kind of names and it's random generated names. It's not a lot of attachment to those players. So I think that's a huge step forward and will definitely help out those dynasties being longer in the future, being really, really long dynasties. I mean, you'll hear of guys going 60 years and doing the same team over and over again, recruiting and doing all of that type of stuff. So it'll be really cool. He said that the reveal will come out in the middle of May. People have taken that to be the 15th or the 16th, which would mean we're only about 10 days out from this thing coming out. We don't really know the exact date, but it seems like it's coming out pretty soon. We will have cover athletes, according to Chris Fowler, which brings me to the final thing that I want to talk about today, which is the cover athletes for this game. When this came out last week, I believe I talked about it briefly and gave my kind of gut reactions of who I think the cover athletes would be. And I didn't love the picks, I'll be totally honest with you. I think I have some better in me. I've thought about it a little bit more. I've seen some other predictions that have gone out. In fact, mine look a lot like J.D. Piquel's over there at On3. I think he's someone that had a good idea, to be totally honest with you. I think this is a very, very good list from him. Now, I do have one very big difference between him and mine, but we fell in line a good bit for sure. But I want to give you guys an idea of where my official predictions fall, because just didn't feel very confident in the ones that I gave out before. So let's start with the Big 12. I think there's going to be 4 different guys for the 4 major conferences. I'm going to give this one to Travis Hunter. I think this is a very tough one. Obviously, it's probably going to be Shedeur or him. I just tend to think there's so many great quarterbacks around the country. There's so many great stories around the country that it'd probably be better to use Travis Hunter in this slot. I think you get the cornerback, wide receiver, you get both sides of the ball, you get one of the most dynamic players in the game, one of the biggest personal brands in the game. I think it would be hugely helpful, and you leave that quarterback spot for someone else that I'll get to here in a second. Patrick Payton is another guy that I think will make the cover. This is the surprise, in my opinion. I think Matt Brown said last week that one of them was going to be a surprise to him, or at least was a surprise to him, so I do think this will be the one. I think you want that Florida State helmet, you want that Florida State logo in the game, and this is one of the best players on the team. I think he could have a huge year, which would only help sales down the road, and I think he's just going to be an absolute dude. So I think that will be the pick for the ACC. Definitely a ton of guys that could have gone in that part. I had Barrett Carter as a possible one there. Cam Ward is even a wild card there, but I think Patrick Payton, could absolutely be the guy. And then I have Donovan Edwards for the Big Ten. I think you have to have Michigan in there. You just do. Returning national champions, the guy that absolutely dominated that game in Donovan Edwards. I feel like you can't pick anyone better from that Michigan team. And then finally, I do have Carson Beck. I think he is possibly the best quarterback in the country on the best team in the country. You get that Power G, that Georgia logo in there. This is the one area where I disagreed with J.D. Piquel. I think it makes sense that you would have Carson Beck on there. And one of the big reasons why I don't have Ewers and he did was Manning is going to opt into this game next year. I feel very confident about that. He said that he wants to be the starter before he opts into any of those games. He will be the starter next year. He will be in the game, likely. And if you think there's a chance they're not putting Arch Manning on this cover, you are insane. He is absolutely going to be the guy on this cover in 2026. And I definitely think, or in 2026, I believe. It'll be the 2026 game at least. I think it's a slam dunk, essentially, and you don't want to have quarterbacks from Texas back-to-back years, so I think they'll go Carson Beck, and then they'll go eventually Arch Manning the year after, but I do think these will be the 4 guys. I think there's plenty of incredible choices to choose from, so if it ends up being 4 totally different guys, I think you could still have incredible picks. You could have Shedeur Sanders and Barrett Carter and Caleb Downs and someone else. You could have Quinn Ewers, you could have any number of people on this, and I would be more than happy to buy it because I'm going to buy it regardless. It could be a black cover, and I'm going to buy it. So we'll definitely keep you guys up to date with everything going on around this game and around something that we've waited just way too long for, to be totally honest with you. The full breakdown should be coming in the next little bit, hopefully sometime in the middle of next week, I would assume, but we'll figure all that out, and once it comes out, we will break down everything that you guys need to know about this game. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for more content and updates. We have tons of people doing incredible work around every sport you could possibly want right now, so definitely tune in to all those shows to get all the updates you can need. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to